Pardon my youth, News Talk with Rory Hu. I'm your host, Rory. I'm sure that you are aware of what has been happening in Gaza and Ukraine. The humanitarian crises caused by the geopolitical conflicts have captured public attention for months. There have been many debates from politics to religion since the start of the crises. However, lost in the whirlwind of the intense debates is the group of people and their work that aim to relieve the suffering of the affected. You probably have guessed, humanitarians. Right. Humanitarian work has become more and more critical now, given the increased geopolitical fragmentation and extreme weather conditions around the globe. But who are the humanitarians? If you look deeper, they are not just individual practitioners, they are actually a vast network of government organizations, NGOs, the private sector, individual aid workers, and more. The humanitarian sector operates quietly behind the scenes, only coming into the spotlight during major global crises. Only then can we catch a glimpse of their work. Regardless of public attention, their work never stops, like a machine patching up the wounds of the world. Clockwork, ticking behind the glass. But what is the history behind this giant machine? How does the humanitarian sector perform now? Most importantly, what factors will define humanitarian aid in the future? To explore the intricate workings of humanitarian efforts, Mia and I decided to attend the Humanitarian Networks and Partnerships Weeks, an annual 2-week hybrid conference in Geneva, hosted by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA. Bringing together organizations and individuals from around the world, HMPW offered the ideal opportunity to gain deeper insights into the humanitarian sector. From April 29th to May 10th, we attended multiple HMPW sessions and had the honor of interviewing 3 female leaders of OCHA: Joyce Msuya, the UN Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs; Najwa Mekki, OCHA's Communication Director; and Lisa Doughten, OCHA's Financing and Partnerships Director. With the help of the experts, we have gained an overview of the history, present, and future of humanitarian aid. Now, let's get to the big question. Before we start our memory lane down the history of humanitarianism, we have this million-dollar question to answer. For the crises that happened in areas far away from us and affected the people who are so different from us, why do we care? The 3 leaders in the humanitarian sector offered their own excellent point of view. Let's take a look.
One, I have learned we as human beings have more in common than in difference. So for example, when I worked at the World Bank, I met people from all over the world, same here in the United Nations, but particularly in the World Bank, I lived in China and South Korea, and working with national staff, even though we were brought up in different countries, I realized actually we are very similar. For example, I'm a mother of 2 children. I have the same aspirations as my colleagues have.
Najwa Mekki echoes her sentiment that families are the same wherever you
Your
go.
developed country, or if you live in a developing country, at the end of the day, a child is still a child, a mother is still a mother, a father is still a father, a person with disability will still face similar challenges. So we look at what and this is part of our job as well, we look at what unites us as human beings, and we need to remember what's happening in a country that may not be the same country where we live. There is no guarantee that it won't happen to me. And the world is so interconnected, and the world is so, it's a global village at the end of the day, that what happens in a place like, Bangui, and I was in Bangui just a couple of weeks ago, has repercussions beyond Bangui in the Central African Republic, whether it's in the region or globally. And we see this today on our television screens, what's happening in Gaza and the impact that it's having on campuses across the United States, for example. So the challenges we face, they may be different from one country to another, but the impact and the way they affect us is what unites us, and our ability to deal with that is what unites us. If I can give another example, the climate crisis, for example, it's wreaking havoc around the world, and it's causing wildfires in a lot of places. It's causing floods in other places. It's causing droughts in other places. So it is the way it's impacting people around the world, and the way it's driving and increasing humanitarian needs around the world may be different, from one country to another.
All their sentiments underscore the principle of humanity. Joyce Msuya's words that humans have more in common than in difference parallel a quote popularly attributed to ancient philosopher Socrates. "I am neither Athenian nor Greek, but a citizen of the world." Although the humanitarian sector looks drastically different today, this core principle has never changed since humanitarianism's inception. Indeed, modern humanitarian principles can be traced all the way back to Greco-Roman times. Roman author Cicero describes the concept of universi generis humani societas, or that all people, in the end, belong to the same community, that of humankind. Cicero's thoughts mark the beginning of seeing and treating both friends and enemies as human. It was an integral step towards the principles of neutrality and impartiality today. Enemy or friend, a human is a human and deserves to be saved. The seeds of humanitarianism, sown by Socrates, Cicero, and other ancient philosophers, are evident in Greco-Roman writings that outline the proper treatment of prisoners and enemies during wartime. These ideas would eventually take root in places such as the Geneva Conventions over 2,000 years later. A similar development happened in a civilization across the ocean, China. Hannah Krebs notes in a research report for the Overseas Development Institute, a global affairs think tank, that much of ancient humanitarian aid is centered around Confucianism, a philosophy that is based in human virtues. Emphasizing the fundamental good of humanity and our capacity for kindness, Confucianism has driven humanitarian efforts in China. Krebs continues that the Confucian concept of responsibility and legitimacy has forged China's understanding of humanitarianism. Attributes such as run, benevolence, and yi, righteousness, featured in Confucian texts. Beyond philosophy, religion has also heavily influenced humanitarian aid. As we move from ancient to medieval times, its impact becomes undeniable. Elizabeth Ferris in the International Review of the Red Cross writes that, long before international humanitarian law was formalized in treaty law, individuals and faith communities provided assistance to those afflicted by natural disaster, persecution, uprooting, and war. Many religious texts or tenets urge people to convey care and kindness to others in their actions. Religious motivation has often driven humanitarian aid, and Ferris continues that in the later medieval period, monasteries were often places of refuge and hospitality for strangers. Catholic orders were established to provide charity to the poor, medical care to the sick, education for children, and hospitality to strangers. These acts of kindness, motivated by religion, would be the early form of humanitarian aid. As humanitarian aid moved from medieval to modern, its core principles remained intact. Henry Dunant, the Swiss businessman commonly credited with founding modern humanitarian aid, spoke out against the atrocious treatment of prisoners at the Battle of Solferino. His work led to the founding of the Red Cross in 1863 and spurred the evolution of the humanitarian sector. The Northern Chinese famine from 1876 to 1879 gave birth to the first formal international relief fund, signaling the rise of finance in humanitarian affairs. After the creation of the United Nations following World War II, the humanitarian sector experienced unprecedented growth. A group of medical workers and Irish Catholic missionaries raised unparalleled funds to aid the state of Biafra after the Nigerian Civil War from 1967 to 1970, a crisis that led to the first televised famine. Soon, humanitarian organizations began to sprout rapidly. Doctors Without Borders in 1971, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in 1991, the World Central Kitchen in 2010, and many, many more. The humanitarian sector skyrocketed in size, with total funding rising by over $20 billion in the span of just 20 years. Although youth appeared relatively late in humanitarian history, they are certainly not a group to be ignored. One of the first recorded youth humanitarian actions was a play by 6 children in 1884 that raised $50 for humanitarian aid. World War I spurred the founding of the Junior Red Cross. Youth could participate in growing vegetables for the nation, also known as Victory Gardens, and send supplies to fellow students overseas. In total, Junior Red Cross members raised over $3 million, an impressive feat for the Red Cross during World War I. Today, the American Red Cross offers local clubs and a volunteer program to young humanitarians interested in making a difference. beyond the Red Cross, young humanitarians today are advocating and raising awareness for critical causes such as climate change. These activists embody the spirit of humanitarianism, showcasing just how far the concept has come since ancient civilizations. Yet, beneath this picture of forward progress, there are undercurrents of a darker narrative. Joelle Glassman at the Center for Humanitarian Action argues that humanitarian compassion is linked to European colonialism. Stanford historian J.P. Doughten documents specifically the building of the Congo-Océan Railway, a French humanitarian project intended to benefit the Congolese people. Instead, over 20,000 indigenous laborers died over the course of the 12-year endeavor. But Doughten notes that French officials never doubted the humanity of the project, even in the face of mounting evidence that Africans regularly experienced beatings, disease, and starvation. Humanitarian aid faces a legacy of colonialism, superiority, and the dangers of falling into a savior complex mindset. The sector walks a fine line between genuinely trying to help and regressing to patterns resembling colonialism. Although imposing Western beliefs can sometimes benefit developing countries, such actions perpetuate a dangerous mindset of superiority and, more often than not, lead to horrific consequences. With the understanding about how humanitarian aid has been developed since ancient times, let's look at how the humanitarian sector operates today. Even though the core principles of humanitarian aid remain the same, the sector has, with the development of new technology, evolved greatly and adopted many innovative approaches. One such approach is anticipatory action. While aid has historically been reactive, responding to crises after they have occurred, anticipatory action predicts humanitarian disasters and works to prevent them. Lisa Doughten, the Chief Director of Finance Department at OCHA, offered insight into anticipatory action.
And I guess another thing I was wondering was, how is finance related to anticipatory action? Can adequate funding prevent crises in advance?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for asking that question, because anticipatory action is something that we at OCHA have been working on for a long time with other partners who have also been working on it, like the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. And that's really trying to address the need before it happens, because it's much more cost-effective, cost-efficient when you address the needs before they happen. Because if you have a flood, you're going to have to potentially airlift supplies, either by helicopter or by airplane. Or you pre-position. If you pre-position the supplies in advance, whether it's water purification tablets or seeds and tools and other things that you need, if you pre-position those, transportation costs are a lot less. People have things when they need it, where they need it. And so what we've been doing in OCHA, about 70% of the anticipatory action has been funded by this global fund I mentioned, the Central Emergency Response Fund, or it's called the CERF. And so we find that if we work with the communities, we listen to what they need, we pre-plan the partnerships, and then we provide the funding. So as soon as something happens, if there's a trigger saying if a river rises to a certain level, then there's a trigger that gets hit, then the funding is available immediately to the partners for the pre-arranged programming. So it really works quite well. And in one case, within 14 minutes of the floods rising, the floodwaters rising, our funding was released to the partners and they had it in their bank accounts within 14 minutes.
Wow. Beyond innovations in methodology, humanitarianism today has vastly expanded in scope and scale since Dunant's time. Aid in the past was divided and disjointed. Different organizations often carried out the same actions or overlooked areas of need, leading to inefficient resource allocation and even failed efforts at times. In recent years, however, these scattered initiatives have joined together.
Joyce Msuya shared her story on how different organizations collaborated to provide an educational, health-based, and developmental solution for the children of displaced families from war zones in
entities within the United Nations, but also outside, for example, NGOs, friends, but also international financial institutions to provide basic services. I remember one of my trips to Yemen, which is a war zone. I visited a project sponsored by UNICEF and a local NGO that had schools for families that have been displaced from one part of Yemen to the other because of war. But children had schools, they had a play area, like a playground, and I was talking to young children for their own mental health. They were doing some art projects to basically distract them from the conflict around them. And I talked to the teachers. Most of them were volunteers from the community. So education is definitely one. The second is good health. There are health facilities. Are they enough for most of these crisis-stricken areas? No. But organizations such as WHO, the World Health Organization, local NGOs, they're working to actually provide basic medical services like immunization, so children could just be healthy to be able to go to school. And then, of course, you have what we call the development partners, the agencies, organizations that build schools, build hospitals, infrastructure for the families.
Msuya's story opened our eyes to how much the scale of humanitarian aid has grown. This type of collaboration exemplifies the cluster system the sector has established in recent years, an effective and targeted solution to complex issues. The scope of modern aid is far beyond simply treating wounded soldiers as it was in the past. Now, it's about rebuilding foundations for generations of lives to come. Compared to the past, the most significant advancement in humanitarian aid today is communication. The unprecedented scale of global collaboration between different organizations relies on this capability. In addition to coordination within the humanitarian sector, communication with affected communities and the public is equally crucial for successful aid.
Listening to what people need. It's something that's emphasized both in Mekki's field of communication and Lisa Doughten's role in partnerships.
How do you think humanitarian action has evolved since its past efforts? And what factors do you think will define it in the future?
It used to be that humanitarian agencies would be present in certain, countries or settings or circumstances, and they would be, here's what we need to give to people who are in need. This community has been affected by a drought. We're going to give them, going to give them seeds, or we're going to give them water, or we're going to give them tents so they can live in tents. We're going to build latrines for them. There wasn't much of a deliberate effort to sit down, to talk to members of that community and say, hey, tell us what you need and tell us what you expect from us and how we can help you.
Work with the communities. We listen to what they need, which is a more dignified way of providing the assistance. Have the conversations, ask the right questions, and I think that's key to really understanding. It's not going and thinking you know what's happening. You don't know exactly what somebody thinks. And if I may just give an example, when I was in Central African Republic a few weeks ago with this donor trip, one of the major projects that we have there is called Accountability to Affected People. And so one of our funds that we manage on behalf of the system provides funding for people to go and listen, to sit in a community group and say, what are the things that you still need? Are you getting what you need? And what I heard were women saying, we need to have the hospital fees paid so we can have a safe childbirth, because we can't have that in this displaced persons camp.
So that's the shift that's been taking place over the past few years, and a bit, more concretely recently. In OCHA, we have something called the Flagship Initiative, which is something that we launched just last year as a pilot for now in 4 countries, the Philippines, Colombia, South Sudan, Niger, where we are deliberate in going to the communities, to outside of the capitals, outside to the deep, what we call deep field sometimes, like to the most remote area that you can think of. And we sit with the communities and we say, we're here to help, we're here to listen. What do you need? And then based on that, we provide that need. That's the evolution that's taken place a bit modestly, but that's the evolution where I think and I believe that the humanitarian system should be going.
From the past to the present, humanitarian aid has undoubtedly grown bigger, with an expansion in scale and scope driven by unprecedented global collaboration. Now, as we race into the future, aid is getting smarter. New technologies such as drones, robots, or AI can improve the efficiency of aid and solve key problems the sector faces today. AI could analyze risks and predict scenarios to assist with anticipatory action, or reconstruct organization systems to streamline communication and resource distribution. Furthermore, AI can be used to tackle one of the biggest issues that obstruct humanitarian efforts: misinformation.
How important do you think that if false information and propaganda would have on parties that are involved with conflict and the outside world?
This is such a big problem that we're dealing with in a lot of countries right now. The issue, we call it misinformation, disinformation, and hate. It's how lies can spread very, very quickly and very, very easily. We've seen this during COVID. We've seen it about vaccines. We see it in a lot of countries where we work, Myanmar, Yemen, Burkina Faso. There's a lot of places where disinformation, misinformation, and sometimes, it's sometimes shared deliberately and with bad intentions, can affect the work that we do. It can affect the safety of our teams, and it can affect also communities themselves.
Gannett, an AI system spotlighted during an HNPW session, offers a solution to misinformation in humanitarian communication. Its algorithm, designed to present accurate and real-time information on humanitarian crises, helps to detect and weed out misinformation, gathering data from reliable resources to present the most factual picture possible. In addition to detecting misinformation, technology can assist with research and data collection in remote areas.
Well, I've actually seen examples of AI in helping avert humanitarian crisis. Let me give you a specific example. Last year, I traveled to an African country called Mozambique in Southern Africa, Eastern Southern Africa. And Mozambique usually gets cyclones out of climate shocks every single year. And one of our roles was actually to support local partners who are using drone technology to identify early signs of cyclones. So before the natural disaster hits communities and cause havoc, this technology allows the government, but also local humanitarians, to prepare communities to move away from the areas to be hit by cyclones to save lives. So that is one specific example that I saw where AI could help. And we're still, I think, since the technology is still unfolding, there are other people who are looking at how AI could be used more in the humanitarian.
With technological innovations gaining prevalence in humanitarian aid, the future of humanitarianism is certainly in the hands of the youth. They hold the keys to technology, science research, and social media. Growing up in a digital age, young people are better acquainted with and equipped to handle new technology. They can deftly navigate the digital world with a fresh creative perspective to revitalize and modernize humanitarian aid. Hand in hand with this digital familiarity comes the young generation's work in scientific research. The Pew Research Center reports that the number of STEM bachelor's degrees awarded grew by 62% from 2010 to 2018, in comparison to 20% for all degrees. As STEM graduates surge in the young generation, youth can apply innovative techniques for cutting-edge research, given their experience as digital natives. Beyond applying digital skills to science research, the young generation can improve humanitarian communication with the public by utilizing social media, a communication platform they have greater influence over than adults. Youth can start viral campaigns to raise awareness about key humanitarian issues. Meanwhile, youth in affected populations could be trained to start their own humanitarian initiatives, opening up learning programs with their peers and assisting others within their community. Over time, this could increase resilience within affected communities and reduce dependence on external aid. in turn lessening the pressure on the humanitarian sector to respond to so many crises.
And, I wanted to shift gears a little bit to talk about kind of one of the main focuses of this interview. Obviously, I'm a young reporter, and one thing that I'm super curious about is what role do you think the young generation plays and will play in the humanitarian sector, and how can they contribute meaningfully?
I think young people deserve more credit than they're getting for all of the amazing work that they are doing. Because don't forget, climate crisis now is one of the biggest drivers of humanitarian need. So the work that young people have done in putting the climate crisis on everybody's radar is remarkable and impressive. For me, it's about knowledge, and it's about staying informed and being educated about the state of the world and what's happening, and how we can, as a bare minimum, raise awareness and spread the word. Everything else is informed on the basis of that. And again, the work of young people on the climate crisis for me is a textbook case of how young people can drive change in extremely meaningful ways.
The humanitarian sector undoubtedly faces many challenges. Misinformation, humanitarian access, lack of funding, global conflict, the list goes on and on. For humanitarians, the expansion of this sector is a sad development because it reflects the increased suffering, according to Jens Lerche, OCHA's Geneva spokesperson. Advancements in humanitarian aid are not celebratory ones. Humanitarians would altruistically rather be out of work if it meant the absence of crises that the sector targets. Despite this, we were invigorated by the spirit we witnessed at HMPW and beyond. From Greco-Roman philosophy to Denon's cry against the suffering of soldiers to the global system of humanitarian aid today, we have been inspired by the exponential development the humanitarian sector has seen to respond to the growing needs in the world. Although it is bittersweet, we are excited for where the sector will go in the future. Msuya, too, is excited for what youth in particular will bring to the table.
I think young people give me a lot of hope. If I look at your generation compared to ours, you're much more united.
We hope that our generation can truly show our unity by bringing our digital prowess to the humanitarian sector. Perhaps with the help of youth, the humanitarian sector will one day be able to bridge the two worlds, one of humans and the other of humans too. Well, that's it for today's episode of Pardon My Youth, the news talk with Rory Hu. I'll see you next time.
That wish, the common thread for humanity, is pretty much constant.